Hello and welcome to Westwind, an audio podcast about cancer, technology in medicine, and policy issues. I'm host and medical oncologist Dr. Jack West from the City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center in the Los Angeles area. You can find Westwind material at BeaconMedIC, one word.com, at iTunes, or just about anywhere you get podcast content. I would just ask that you show your interest and support by subscribing, commenting, sharing by telling friends and colleagues in person and on social media, and rating it however you feel is appropriate. You can also share your ideas and opinions by emailing us at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. I'm very pleased to be joined today by my friend, Dr. Jean-Charles Soria, who is Senior Vice President of Research and Development in Oncology at AstraZeneca and was Professor of Medicine and Medical Oncology at South Paris University from 2006 to 2017. He was also chair of the Drug Development Department at the Gustave Roussy Cancer Center in Paris, where he led a wide range of trials in early clinical development, phase 1 studies in lung cancer, and also very important work in personalized medicine. He has also been a leader in ESMO, including serving as the scientific chair of several international cancer meetings, and he served as the editor-in-chief for Annals of Oncology. There's more than that, but I'm eager to get on with the discussion with him. So, Jean-Charles, thanks so much for taking the time to talk today.
Jack, it's truly a pleasure to be able to join you today and have this discussion.
Oh, great. I'd like to start with the backstory. I think people know you and some of the other luminaries in the field from the podium at ESMO or ASCO or various other meetings, but not always a good sense of the actual person behind that. Can you tell me about where you grew up? Was that in Paris? And whether you knew from early on you'd be interested in medicine or whether that came later?
Sure, Jack. I have an interesting life in the sense that I have moved countries frequently. I am born in La Paz, Bolivia, which is the highest capital in the world. And I lived there till I was 12 years old. Then I moved to France. And this is due to the fact that my mother is Bolivian, my father is French. And we moved when I was 12 because my sister developed acute leukemia. And you have there the foundation on why I choose to go to medicine.
That's amazing. I actually had no idea about either your parents' history or your sister. I'm sorry to hear about that. But it's interesting that with the challenges that your sister had, that actually led you to be interested in the field and it didn't alienate you from it. I guess you came away with some good models of oncologists, and it even at a time when I don't think there was as many advances as there have been in recent years.
You're right, Jack. In the mid-80s, the survival rates for acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children were in the 20-25%. My sister was blessed to be one of those survivors. But of course, it took 2 to 3 years of therapy between the induction and the consolidation phase to get her there. And I have very vivid memories of physicians that came at home when we were in Paris to do lumbar punctions and injections of intrathecally of chemotherapy. And these were highly talented hematologists that understood that they need to get in proximity with the families and will go to the house of patients rather than mandating every time for the patient to go to the hospital. So that level of sacrifice, because they usually came at home late at 7 p.m., and it impacted me a lot. They were role models for me.
That's amazing. So when you went to university, was that as a pre-med or whatever the equivalent would be in France, or did you consider other things along the way before absolutely settling on medicine?
Yeah, so I did my middle and high school in Paris, and it was very clear to me that I had a personal issue with cancer and hematological malignancy. So I had a clear idea that I wanted to go into medicine, and I had a very clear idea that I wanted to go into a specialty that will be related to treating malignancies. And in France, there is no pre-med. You just get in directly into medical school. It's a very harsh first year. It's a very competitive year. Anyone can register as a first year student in medical school, but only one student out of 7 of those registered gets to stay and pass to the second year. So it's a very harsh competitive examination at the end of first year.
So you were very committed to oncology within the field of medicine. You had identified that from your childhood experiences. What led you to pursue a PhD? And do you feel that that was a critical component of what shaped your career since then?
Absolutely. The PhD came as an evidence to me, not only based on my personal story with the leukemia of my sister, but also because it was very clear that what the medical knowledge was able to provide for most cancer patients was suboptimal survival. And it made a lot of sense to me to say, well, we need to better understand what is driving cancer development, what are the bases, what is fueling this proliferation. And that's why I went and did a PhD in molecular biology.
Do you feel that these days, with oncology becoming so dependent on molecular mechanisms, targeted therapies, now immunotherapy, that there's a greater need for oncologists to have more time for molecular medicine in their training?
I think it's very clear that systemic therapies have been enriched and modified over the last 20 years. I mean, the classical hormonal therapies and chemotherapies now coexist with targeted agents and immunotherapies. And I would say it's fair to say that having strong scientific foundation and a PhD might not be a must, but at least a master of science, either in immunology, which is, right now something extremely useful, or in molecular biology, helps to better apprehend some of the key challenges that we face and some of the barriers that we face in the development of new therapies.
You have a direct connection to hematologic malignancies, and there have been advances there, but you went into lung cancer as a field. And I think that you went into it at a time when there were not a lot of tremendous successes. Was it that challenge and unmet need that attracted you, or was there something about the science behind it? What led you into thoracic oncology as a field when you entered it before we had all these advances of recent years?
It's a great question, Jack. Thank you for asking. In fact, when I started my fellowship, I started in hematology. And then I realized that the success rate that was in the mid 80s of 25% had jumped to the 80%, correct? And I had a very good mentor in him who told me, Jean-Charles, we have solved the majority of the challenges in hematology. You seem to be a bright young fellow with a lot of energy and passion. Let me give you a nice challenge. The leukemia of the 80s is the lung cancer of the late 90s. So why don't you try to put your energy and work on lung cancer? Because that's really a very frequent cancer with a very dismal survival. And it's true. I mean, I started doing lung cancer care along with Thierry Le Chevalier, who was a very generous mentor. And at that time, basically, the big news were some cytotoxic therapies that were entering the field. And we had little to offer between best supportive care or cytotoxic therapies.
I definitely see that. I also wanted to make a big impact in a field that was full of challenges and, frankly, a lot of patients who were having disappointing outcomes, and hoping that we could improve on that. What led you to do additional training at MD Anderson, which I think you did for a couple of years? I don't think that was required, was it? Or was there something specific that you were hoping to get out of that experience?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go to MD Anderson from 1999 to 2001 as a postdoc with the Department of Thoracic Head and Neck Medical Oncology that was led by Wong Ki Hong, who unfortunately died recently. So I was working in a molecular biology lab led by Li Mao, and it was an extraordinary experience. It was an extremely active lab developing all the very sophisticated techniques of molecular biology, in situ hybridization for RNA, sequencing at the time when we were doing manual sequencing, correct? I mean, it was very, very cumbersome. And I seek that experience because I always believe in your life that comparing what you do to what is done at a level of excellence in another place is going to be a great opportunity to learn and challenge your own practice. And the three most productive years of my life in terms of science and publications were those 3 years in MD Anderson.
How was the experience of living in the US, I think for the first time in your life at that point, compared to the very different experiences that you had in Bolivia in childhood and then in your later childhood and younger adult years in Paris? What did you get from being immersed in American life and culture at that point?
Yeah, well, the shock from transitioning to Paris to Houston was pretty significant. I mean, initially, I thought I could walk around or go by biking to MD Anderson. I quickly realized that you will never survive the summer and the temperatures of the summer, that a car is needed to do any basic grocery. Houston is a very typical, at least at that time, it was a very typical American city where everything was done by car. Since then, I think there has been development of many new facilities for people to move around, but it was a big shock, correct? I mean, France is a country that has a density of population that is so much higher than Houston. What really blew me up in Houston was how big was everything, correct? The space, the roads, the houses, the buildings. Because for us Europeans, it's misleading to say that the United States is a country, correct? It's truly a continent. It's so big. It's bigger than the entire Europe together. So everything is of a completely different dimension. And it's not just the size of what is built, it's also probably the size of the ambition. And I loved my years in MD Anderson. It was such a vibrant place. At that time, the president was John Mendelsohn. And believe it or not, on Saturdays morning, John Mendelsohn would walk around in the labs to see who was there, who was working there. And I had the opportunity multiple times to exchange with him. We even went shopping at IKEA together. So it was extraordinary. It was very, very energizing, and he was such a luminary and a humble man. And he was doing IKEA grocery because he wanted to offer some furniture to his secretary, and
Uh-huh.
it teach me a lot.
Did you have any of the meatballs there?
Yes, absolutely. I had some of
Yeah.
those meatballs.
That's definitely part of the experience for sure. Well, very few people can say they have had meatballs and done furniture shopping at IKEA with John Mendelsohn. That is quite something. You had the great opportunity to be leading the drug development program at Institut Gustave Roussy. And my sense as an outsider was that France was really a unique setting and continues to be a relatively unusual setting in having such a comprehensive national approach to cancer care research with biomarkers and targeted therapies and these nationally run programs. What was that like? And do you feel that this really was a unique experience? Is this something that should be replicated on a much broader scale? Or were there challenges in working as a community on these programs like you have?
France, as you know, has probably a very unique and interesting healthcare system. We are not what some people will qualify as a socialized healthcare system because in France there is a coexistence of a public and a private sector. But the way health insurance is done in France, there is a national coverage. So anyone in France who is there as a legal resident, whether it's French or a legal foreigner, has health coverage. And when you have cancer, the coverage is almost 100% of the cost. The out of pocket money is extremely limited for a disease like cancer. On top of that, in 2005, at that time, the French president Jacques Chirac, who died recently, launched a national cancer care plan and demanded that everything will be done for equity of access to innovation, both in terms of diagnosis and therapy across France. And I think France has achieved a very good result on creating a democratic access to the basic biomarkers that we need, all the EGFRs, ALKs, ROS, METs, and others. And this has been very successful. And I think it is appalling when you highlight in some of your podcasts and interviews that there are areas in the world and in the US where penetration of molecular profiling is in the 20-30%. So in France, because it's free and it's easy to access, it's much higher. And that creates a change in terms of opportunities. Whether the system in France now is going to be able to adapt to the revolution of having more comprehensive multiplex genetic testing is yet to be seen. And I think there is also the challenge of moving from tissue-based analysis to liquid biopsies, which probably are also a very interesting way to allow for additional access of patients to molecular profiling.
France is a relatively smaller country, and there are centers of excellence scattered throughout the country. Is the pattern that many patients, far more than in the US, for example, receive their care at a tertiary care center of excellence? Or are we just seeing the representatives of a subset of patients who get to those tertiary care centers in France? In other words, are there significant cohorts of patients who are further out who don't have the benefit of these comprehensive biomarker and targeted therapy programs that you've been part of and that your colleagues at Institut Gustave Roussy and several other centers in France are now speaking about and publishing about in the field?
60% of patients in France are treated in what we call the public setting, and around 40% are treated in private setting. Now, I would say, brilliant idea of the National Cancer Plan is to create 28 platforms across the country for molecular testing that are free of charge, both for the academic hospitals that probably, own 2/3 of those molecular platforms, but they are also free of charge to private practice. And I think that was the genius idea. So if you are in private practice somewhere in the beautiful south of France, let's say close to Montpellier, in a private office, they can just send your block to a molecular platform and they will get results free of charge. And that, I think, allows very good penetration of molecular profiling, even in non-tertiary academic settings.
As your career continued, you have had great success at Institut Gustave Roussy, many pivotal trials and a lot of important work in biomarkers. And you also had several other aspects of your career flourish, including your work with ESMO, leading several of the larger scientific conferences, and then the editor-in-chief role at Annals in Oncology. Were there specific areas that you just gravitated into that really had a pull for you, or was this a difficult time in terms of just so many competing things to do and just not enough time to juggle all of these?
As people who know me realize, I'm a typical extrovert, correct?
Yeah.
I get my energy from interaction with others, and I'm pretty hyperactive person. I love to jump from one topic to the next topic to the next topic. What some people will say it's hell because of the multiplicity of the tasks is for me paradise. I love to go from clinical care to the lab to a biomarker discussion to negotiating with the French government about reimbursement of biomarkers to organizing the ESMO meeting to leading a very talented team of associate editors to do annals of oncology. I get my energy from the intellectual motivation, a challenge that I get from the different tasks.
And you also, amidst all of this, have a rich personal life. You're married with children. Any special approach, philosophy, recommendations of how to balance your many professional obligations with your personal life?
Yes, I'm blessed to be married with Isabel, who's a pediatrician for 23 years. I have 4 kids, 3 boys, 1 girl. And, I have always worked very, very hard, but I always have made a very intentional effort to do not work starting Friday 7 p.m. till Sunday 7 p.m. It's very hard. You have your withdrawal syndrome. You have this tendency to check what's going on, but it's so refreshing and it's so important. I am usually quite absent in the evenings during work days, and Isabel takes care of most of the needs of the kids, and I'm always grateful to her for that. But on the weekends, I really try to be the one helping there, doing the grocery, doing homework with the kids, playing with them, going out with them, organizing visits. And in fact, is you also recharge the batteries by doing that because you really switch from an hyperactive, hyper demanding, very dense, intense work environment to a much more relaxed family environment. And I think that has worked extremely well for me. Rather than mixing both all the time, I really try to create that space on the weekends.
That's great. And with all of the success that you've had, it would be tempting to see it as you having a charmed, perfect life. But in fact, I know that you've had real struggles. Your son has had some health issues that have been a real scare for you, your wife, and your whole family. Can you talk a bit about that and the impact it's had?
Yeah, sure, Jack. This is not an easy topic for me, but we have had quite a few challenges, as anyone, correct? I mean, none of us is a postcard story. I
No.
mean, we may look like a postcard when people see me walking with my wife and the 4 kids, and they know that I am being successful. But the reality has been much harder than that. And the latest challenge has been in 2017 the diagnosis of Timothy, my youngest son, who at the time was 7 years and a half, of long QT syndrome. And he developed a cardiac arrest out of nowhere on an evening. And none of us has the mutation that leads to long QT syndrome. So Timothy acquired that mutation in utero, which is, the genetics and the challenges that life can bring. And he has a severe mutation in a potassium channel protein that leads to rhythmic issues in his heart, especially when he's tired or at sleep. And to deal with that, he has had to have beta blockers, he has a pacemaker, he has a defibrillator. We faced in the years 17 to 19 two cardiac arrest and one torsade de pointe. So that has made me much humbler. That has made me much more conscious of the suffering that disease brings with. And that has also made me much more conscious to the fact that while we as physicians have a lot of knowledge, we should always be respectful to keep a space of hope to others. And we're very happy and thankful to God that Timothy is alive today and doing well. But it has been a difficult journey that, yes, has shaped who we are, all of us as a family.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I'm just relieved that he's doing well now and has the safety nets that you described. But I think it's remarkable as much as we try to control the trajectory of our lives, and you've achieved, and you can plan as much as you possibly can, but there are so many issues that come out of left field, and I don't know of anything that is more idiosyncratic and, as you said, humbling than having something like that occur that nobody can plan for, and you just have to react as best you can.
Absolutely. And, I am very grateful to live in the 21st century, where we have pacemakers and defibrillators can be implanted in a kid that, is just 60 pounds. That didn't exist 30 years ago. And the technology has evolved so rapidly. And I'm also very blessed to be able to afford the possibility to have him treated by the best teams.
Absolutely.
But yes, we don't control everything in life. We need to admit it as much as we would wish to. We don't control everything. And we just need to appraise the value of life as it goes every day and love others and love our patients.
We'll continue our discussion with Dr. Jean-Charles Soria in our next episode. Thanks for listening. The West Wind Podcast is a Beacon Medical Interchange production with sound engineering and distribution by Mark Lindsay of Talking Speaker. We hope you'll be motivated to subscribe, whether at BeaconMedIC.com, through iTunes, or through another podcast service. Please also rate it, and I hope you'll be inclined to tell friends and colleagues in real life and on social media. We're always happy to get your suggestions and other input at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. Talk to you again soon.